Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Today I am here with three good friends of mine, and we're going to talk about something that we have just been calling amongst ourselves the book operation. So we're going to kind of explain what that is, and we're going to talk about how the idea came to be, and why books are being sent out. But just to kind of explain what I'm talking about, when we talk about the book, we're talking about this book right here, which people have seen me write about, or they've seen me talk about. I've reviewed it both in written form and then as part of a video that I did along with Matt Lohmeyer's book. So people know how I feel about the book. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the book, but we're going to talk a little bit about the book, but more specifically, we're going to talk about this idea that a couple individuals came up with to send this book to senior leaders in the military and why that is important. So who do I have with me here today? I have Rob Green, I have Carolyn Rocco, and I have Billy Moseley. So if you don't necessarily know who those individuals are, and you should, but I'm going to go through a quick bio of each. So Commander Robert Green has become one of the Navy's most vocal figures in the fight against the unlawful implementation of the military COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Banned from his building and fired from his position leading a 650-person unit, he is the author of numerous impactful internal Navy complaints, multiple whistleblower reports to Congress, and a key source of evidence for ongoing federal court cases related to the military vaccine mandate. He's obviously the author of this book, Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines, A Story of Hope for Those Who Love Liberty. So, Rob, thanks for being on here with us today.
Thanks, Brad. Honored to be here.
We also have Carolyn Rocco. Carolyn Rocco is a prior enlisted Air Force Lieutenant Colonel who graduated ROTC as a distinguished graduate in 2007. She is a two-time Office of Special Investigations, or OSI, commander, and was an Air Force ROTC instructor in the Pacific Northwest when the DoD vaccine mandate was implemented. She was unable to return to OSI after successfully completing 2 years as an instructor because she was not vaccinated, which resulted in her staying a third year in the Pacific Northwest. She was denied a medical exemption and subsequently submitted a religious accommodation request, which is also denied. In August of 2022, Ohio Judge McFarland issued a preliminary injunction for Air and Space Force members, which protected Carolyn from being removed from service. So, Carolyn, thank you as well for being with us.
Thank you.
And Lieutenant Billy Moseley. Billy enlisted in the Navy in 2000, reaching the rank of Gunner's Mate Chief Petty Officer before earning a commission in 2014. Lieutenant Moseley has served on the USS PINCKNEY as a systems test officer. He is currently assigned to the US Bunker Hill as the systems test officer. And in May 2022, Billy faced a Naval Administrative Separation Board and was retained in service because they found that he did not commit misconduct by refusing the COVID-19 vaccine mandate because it was unlawful. So we'll probably talk at least a little about that as well. So, Billy, also, thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Appreciate you putting this on.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of talk about where the idea came from for the book, and then also to send the book out to senior military officers, which I think is a fantastic idea. We'll talk about how that came to be and what we think the significance of the, quote unquote, book operation really is. But let's talk a little bit about the book. So, Rob, this is your book. So tell us where you got the idea to write the book, how you wrote the book, and what you feel like the impact of the book has been so far.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We were talking about this the other day, and I shared with you that all the podcasts and interviews, even a couple TV appearances, I've never actually been asked the question, why? Why did you write the book? So I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about it. It boils down to we have seen a lot of misinformation out there, disinformation, operations by our own government, by senior leaders to get us distracted, looking other ways. And I kind of knew, hey, they're going to move on from this. They're going to move on really quickly. So it was September, actually, of 2022. And I said, you know what? They had just decided to put me back to work. I had been fired. I was sitting at home doing nothing for 7 months. My only job was to call in and make sure that I was alive. They even stopped taking those calls for 4 or 5 months. And so, at some point when they said, "Hey, we just can't have you sitting around doing nothing now that the injunction's in place, we're gonna have to put you back to work." And I kind of knew it was instinct, it was God, it was something, but I knew like, hey, they're going to move on from this. They're going to find a way to pretend this never happened, to not worry about it, to, they're never going to right the wrongs unless we force them. So I was like, I need to take detailed notes. I need to get all this down on paper. There's a few more details there that I think are important, but the most important thing I want to make sure before I turn it back over to you, make sure that folks understand is that this is more than just my story. I had taken a lot of notes on so many people and what happened. I interviewed or messaged or talked on the phone with hundreds of service members who were harmed in various ways. And I tell as many of those stories as I could in the book, tying them into the topic of that particular chapter. And for me, this became a telling of our story. It became us. When I talk to people about the book, I say, we wanted to make sure that we did this and we detailed what happened. And now we're fighting here. And people stop me and I don't even realize I'm doing it. It's subconscious. People stop me like, who's we? Like, who are you talking about? And I have to be like, oh yeah. Like I think that way. I thought that way when I was writing it. This is more than just me, my story. This is our story. That's how I wrote the book. And I think that's why people who went through this with us were able to latch onto it. And I've gotten a couple calls, folks telling me messages and calls, like they had PTSD reading this. It's like, please don't sue me. But people were like emotional. One very prominent lieutenant colonel who was in this fight and still is in this fight called me and said, I wept reading this book. And I mentioned this particular person in the book. And it was that kind of stuff. People's parents with strong, very strong things to say in support because of the stories I told about them or folks that went through something similar to them. So that was kind of how it happened, how it went down. It took me 3 months to write. And we PCS'd at the same time while I was trying to write the book. So there's more stories there. It's pretty crazy, but ultimately, I hope it does justice. And this operation, not my idea, but this operation, I hope, is going to wake up some of those leaders who need to know what happened and what they need to do to fix this.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for giving some of the behind the scenes action on how this came out. So again, you took 3 months to write the book, which is incredible. You said you moved with your family, and you're a father of 7, correct?
That's correct.
So no small feat to move while also trying to write a book. So just incredible that you wrote it. And the book appropriately was released on July 4th of this year. So about 3 months ago, right?
Yep. 3 months.
And then the other thing that I want to say, so clearly you're the author of the book. Your name is at the bottom, well deserved. It is your book, but I would agree with you that when I look at the reception of the book, you're right. The service member has really accepted your book almost as their own. And I say that in a way which of course gives you all credit in terms of being the owner of the intellectual property that went into the book. But with any book, of course, the book belongs to the author, but it also belongs to the reader. And in this regard, what we have seen is a lot of people have latched onto your book. When I spoke to Tech Sergeant Scott Lauterbach from the Air Force Reserves, he showed me pictures of him meeting people and holding up your book. And I cite his case as one of many where individuals have really taken your book to heart because they do see it as a book that it tells our story, not just specifically your story. And in that regard, one of the things that I mentioned in the Substack post that I just put out a day or two ago, just kind of about this, is I refer to your book as an artifact. And I might have even done that somewhere else before, but what I meant by that was this book, it's almost like if you were to talk about differing schools of thought with some sort of historical period, anciently, and you've got archaeologists that are arguing this or arguing that, and someone produces an artifact, and now this artifact has to be dealt with. That's kind of what I meant behind the term as describing it as an artifact, because it's like, hey, this book is out there. This book has been produced. It can't be ignored. You can accept it or you can reject it, but it is a work that is out there. Ignoring it is cowardly. So either take the claims and accept them because they're true, and I do believe you present a very strong case here, obviously. But for those out there who are going to, if they don't accept it, well then okay, well then actively refute it. What are your counterclaims? What's your counter evidence that supports your argumentation? And we're not necessarily seeing that. So Rob, just before we move on, just on that note, what would you kind of tell us about the reception from senior leaders?
So it's been very interesting. The vast majority of senior leaders are ignoring this, right? It's another form of censorship. They're refusing to engage on the merits, like they did with many of our complaints, reports, emails, discussions. They would say, they'd throw up their hands and say, "Not my problem." SecDef said. And they would say, "Hey, I'm just following orders," right? We heard that a lot. I call it the Nuremberg shrug in the book. Well, they're continuing that shrug. They're shrugging off this material. They're shrugging off our very public calling them out. And they continue to move on. However, I will say there are pockets of leaders, and they are very, very few, but at the flag and SES officer level, who are willing to hear it. They have not, and I say courage, maybe that's a little strong. They've not found a way yet to publicly support either our movement for individual liberty in the services, or the book, or repairing the harms, or any of that. But they have met with me privately. One senior executive service leader has actually read the book, gave me feedback, very positive feedback. And I have high hopes for him in the future that he'll be able to take some positive action to correct some of this. I had one two-star admiral. I asked for a meeting with him, and actually sat down with him. He gave me 30 minutes on his calendar. And we chatted about the book and about some other things, and he agreed that he would read the book, and he got about halfway through it. Was last time I had heard back from him. And again, very positive feedback. So for the folks who are reading the book and actually taking the time, they're kind of having to nod their heads and be like, "Oh, I get it. This makes sense. We need to do something about that." But for the most part, we are dealing with some censorship. I mean, from the tech companies too. It's being heavily censored. So we're dealing with both the senior level sort of censorship by not engaging. We're also dealing with high level technical censorship from media companies. But the folks who we can actually get to read this book, very, very positive feedback. And so word of mouth is important here. Anything you can do in your own channels. Very grateful for all that. This book operation is exactly the kind of thing. It's that grassroots sort of movement to go and change the world. So grateful to be here with you and Carolyn and Billy to work on this.
So Rob, you wrote the book, but Billy, I think we probably have to credit you with the book operation. Now, I know there might be some people who helped you along the way in some aspects, but I think that you're the one who came up with the idea. Now, also, Billy, your story is featured in Rob's book. So maybe just give us just kind of the thumbnail sketch of your story, what happened with your admin SEP board, and then also tell us how you came up with the idea to actually send copies of the book to senior leaders within the Navy.
Yeah, I'll start off with the story real quick. So it started off about 3 months after I checked into the USS Bunker Hill in September of 21. And then we'll just fast forward to the testing order that came out that was extremely discriminatory, as we all know. Once I said no to that, I got a text that night around 1900 said, "Get your blues ready for the next day." I kind of played dumb in the text and said, "For what?" And they were like, "Captain's mast at noon." I already knew what was coming. So I showed up the next day in my dress blues, showed up to captain's mast, Article 92, letter of reprimand, detached for cause, escorted around the ship like I was some criminal, right to my stateroom where I had to clear everything out immediately with the master at arms right next to me, and then escorted to the quarterdeck, handed my ID and said, "See ya." And that was it. I didn't look back. And from then, we can fast forward to May. We were waiting to see what was going to happen at that point, as thousands of us were. I got the letter to go into a BOI, and that's when they were going to try to slam me with another than honorable discharge. That's when I also linked up with Doc Vliet and Truth for Health Foundation in Davis and was able to go through with them. Went to the BOI, and to keep that one short, we came out on the end about 10 hours later at the end of the day with them ruling the vaccine mandate unlawful and no basis for misconduct as an officer. And then that was a little over a year ago. That was May 20th, 2022. So.
Okay, so incredible story. And again, for those who might not know, so I think of the four of us, you're actually the one who has the most number of years of service. So what are you at, 22 years?
23 right now.
Okay. Yeah. So
I'll be submitting my resignation letter next week, which you already saw.
I did. I did. So and then we'll move on. But I just want to make sure for those who are listening to make sure they understand the significance of what happened in your board. So you were appearing for this board potentially to be separated from the Navy because, in their words, you had committed misconduct by disobeying an order to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, correct?
Initially, the initial order was the test. That's what I got slammed for. They were very adamant about documenting, hey, this captain's mask, the 92 LOR, was for the testing, denying the testing order that we're telling you to do weekly.
Got it. Okay,
and then the rest got slapped on. That's why they tried to slam me with an OTH. Another thing I always forget to leave out is I did not submit an RA at the time. I didn't feel that was the right answer. For many reasons, I wanted to fight it on the legal front and not have to explain, my beliefs and my personal beliefs to anybody else. We don't owe that to another man or woman on this planet. So that's why I stood my ground on the legal basis alone, and that's what triggered the rest of it.
And so when you appeared before this board, the finding was, so you and your attorney, Davis Younts, were able to argue that the order that you had disobeyed was unlawful. Therefore, you had not committed misconduct by disobeying it. So that was basically the argument that you used. You convinced the board of this, and so therefore you were retained because they found that you were not guilty of having committed misconduct. Am I right in what happened?
100% correct. That's exactly what happened. It was that simple. It was a long day, of course.
Yep.
And we laid out a lot of evidence, and Davis was really good about taking it back to the anthrax days and showing all the court, the proceedings that came out of the court there and what Congress ruled and some of the federal statutes that came out of that as well that we're supposed to be following right now, obviously, that weren't followed. And once we showed them all that, and the endless testimony and people calling in, they really had no choice. And I say that, but it's kind of weird because I know Davis has had follow-on cases with other BOIs using my case as a precedent.
Yep. And
it didn't work. So it's kind of weird at the same time. All right.
And just for people listening who might have the question, let's go ahead and answer it for them. So you appeared before a board that is just considered to be an administrative board. So while it might hold some sort of precedent within the military, perhaps, it doesn't necessarily hold legal precedent for like a court of law anywhere else. So while it was fantastic that you, of course, won this victory in court, it didn't necessarily bleed over as a precedent that could be widely applicated across the board, correct?
100% correct. Yeah. I guess you could call it a soft legal precedent.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. It's unfortunate, but it's important for us to kind of make that nuanced distinction just for people who are listening. So that, because a lot of people are going to ask the question, well, if that happened, why wasn't that applied? And technically, because like you said, that's probably a good way to word it. It was just a soft legal precedent. Now, Billy, your story is in Rob's book. Now, this admin SEP board that you just talked about, so that was in May of 2022, correct?
Yep, 20 May 2022.
Okay. So let's move forward in time and tell us how you came up with the idea that eventually got to you distributing copies of this book to senior leaders within the Navy.
All right. Yeah, I'll actually go back a little bit. So I'm no stranger, neither is my family, to handing out flyers or posting stickers or sending emails or engaging with local leaders. So I'd say we were stationed in Guam during the lockdown and the whole Theodore Roosevelt fiasco and everything. We were over there. It was crazy on that island. But it didn't take but a few months into the lockdowns and the pandemic to start realizing something's not right, and the massive overreach and just the endless medical tyranny. So I started printing flyers out everywhere and left and right, thousands of them across the island, leaving them randomly all the places, handing them out to people, just random stuff that's going on, and and evidence from within our government institutes or medical institutes or so on and so forth. Even in 2021, when I was stationed in Dahlgren, Virginia, we started doing stickers everywhere. I came across some organizations that have stickers with founding father quotes all over them or quotes about medical tyranny, and we would slap them all over the place, literally everywhere, all over base, the gyms, the pools at the base in Virginia, to the point where I got banned from all MWR facilities and I'm getting caught. Whatever, nothing happened, moved on, and we'll move on to now to the book piece. So continued that over the next year and a half or so, up until your letter came out, and when I first started seeing you come out in your story. And I believe it was middle of May when you wrote that Substack appeal, your appeal to those who went along. It was an amazing article. And that's when I was like, why don't I just start mailing this one out? And that's when I first called you and spoke with you about it. You gave me the permission to do it. And with the kids and we just slapped 60 plus letters together, printed them all out, and had all the addresses down to various naval commands. Mailed them all out, stamped them up, dropped them in the mail, mailed them out. And then it was about 2 months later when, Rob's book was released. And my first thing was like, why don't we just start handing them out? So I did. I got permission from Rob, of course, to hand them out. And my first place I went, my idea at the time was I'm going to start slamming them on desks everywhere. I'm going to go to every CO I can in San Diego County and slam them on their desk. Done, wherever I can. So I went over to Spec Warcom first, drop it to the admin over there, and told him to hand it up to these admirals. 2 books went up to the admirals. I don't know what happened after that, no issue. I went right across the street 5 minutes later to Pacific Fleet and dropped it off, and then drove back across to the beach with my kids, started getting them set up. And I'd say about 15 minutes has only elapsed. I went back to the truck and I had multiple missed calls, and it was from Fleet Forces. And I looked at my wife, I was like, this is it. They're coming. They're going to be like, Lieutenant Moseley, get in here now. I was like, it's game time. Well, it wasn't. I called them back, and it was just the Admiral's yeoman saying, we can't accept it as a gift. It's more than $9.99. I was like, check. I'll drive over and get the book. I'll get it right now. So we drove back, got the books, and that's when I got on in the chats with Carolyn and Rob and a few others. And hey, they're going to start turning these down and have an excuse. And that's when I believe Carolyn came up with the idea for the memo, and so we can avoid the gift piece. And then she, crafted the beautifully worded memo that we all took and kind of made our own, but she started the basis of that. And then that's what Rob said too. Rob agreed, let's make an official memo. Let's go from there. And that's what it is. So anybody that's read the Substack that Brad just released on the book operation, it explains it in there and has our letters in there that we have sent out with the book.
Yeah. So thanks for taking us through that, Billy. So first of all, incredible idea. I mean, I feel humbled that you took one of the Substack posts that I wrote, and I've written several posts that have been pretty scathing, but that one, an appeal to those who went along, that one was fairly direct for sure. So
that's why I chose that one. It was the most aggressive one you wrote.
Yeah, it's pretty aggressive. So okay, cool. So you took that and you printed copies of that, and then you handed that out to about 60 senior leaders, correct?
Correct. All over the US.
Okay. And then so that was in May, and then on July 4th the book comes out. Then you get the idea, hey, I can do the same thing with the book. You start handing it out. And then you immediately run into this obstacle where some senior leaders might say, hey, listen, there is a stipulation that does not permit me to accept a gift. It's over, $9.99. And of course, that gives them a very easy out to decline, the book. So then Carolyn had this idea for how we can kind of circumvent that. So Carolyn, tell us how you first heard about that, and then your idea to craft this memo that maybe gives a little bit more of the story as to why we're giving this book out, but of course addresses this yes, it's a legitimate, concern, because I realize that stipulation does exist for these senior leaders in terms of what gifts they can or cannot accept. However, I also realize that it gives them a very easy out. So how'd you come up with the idea to craft this memo to try and get around that, but also share a little bit more of an idea as to why people were sending this, the book out to senior leaders anyway?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. So as we all know on this chat, because we've been in conversation for, I would say, years now, knowing Billy and Rob, the communication had already been established in multiple lines of communication. So when I heard about Billy's effort, I knew immediately that I needed to get in on this. So he was sending them to Navy leaders. I figured I would send it to Air Force leaders. But as you just mentioned, the problem was they had an easy out to refuse the book. And so the reality is it's not a gift. We are not giving this to them for them to take with them forever and ever. In fact, but in order to explain that, we said we gave them options, right? You can either pass it on to a colleague, you can leave it in your office for your predecessor or your successor to read. Or you can put it in the command library so that other personnel within that leader's organization would have access to it. And so we didn't want to leave them with an easy out. And so I thought by looking at those options, it would be a good way to tell the truth and to really tell them what we wanted, because in all honesty, that's exactly what we want. We want this book to be shared by the military leaders. And so with that said, I know my story is a little bit different than Billy's, and I think that's essentially what drove each of us writing our own memorandum to be enclosed with the book. Billy, as you can see, he went through hell. I am grateful and thankful that I did not experience all the things that Billy experienced. And so my memo, if you were to do a comparison, would be a bit of the kindler, gentler, and maybe we can cough that up to being in the Air Force. And we all know the Air Force is a kindler, gentler of the services. So I will, I'll give ourselves a jab there. But in all seriousness, it is a plea. At least my memo is a plea to anybody who's willing to listen. And for me, it was an unfortunate experience and disclosure and without getting into my entire story, I will say I did submit a religious accommodation after my medical exemption request was denied. And like most of us, the religious accommodation was denied. And so when I FOIA'd the communication amongst the leaders that made that decision, the FOIA return was literally as black as this phone. It was nothing but black pages. Fast forward a month or two, and I was able to get my hands on the unredacted package that went up to our MAGCOM, our 3-star commander. And when I read the words in that package, and I read the blatant lies about me and about the situation, I knew then that senior leaders were being told a story that was not true and not representative of what we as peons, majors and below at the time, what we were experiencing. And so and I have been on the side of making decisions, and this is before COVID, without having all the facts. And so there is some credibility in saying, hey, you don't know what you don't know. And so I can't automatically blame that assume that every single leader knew exactly what was happening. And so by sending them the book, it provided me an opportunity to share with them in Rob's perfectly documented words exactly what happened, what transpired. And now it's kind of also off of my shoulders and my conscience of, hey, you can't blame me for not trying. Now, whether or not somebody's actually going to open the book, read the book, and then truly try to understand what happened with the stories within that book, that's on them. But at this point, I really do think there are so many who just might not really fully understand what transpired. So for us, it's very common, and we all know exactly what happened just because we've built these relationships over the last 1 to 2 years. But I can also say that for any person who might have had an organization that did not have a member who submitted a religious accommodation or tried to fight this mandate, I don't think they really know exactly what took place. And so similar to Billy and Rob, like this is this is the hill I'm willing to die on. Like, what has transpired cannot happen again. And I will remain, professional and tactful, but we all just need to be adults and have a conversation and lay out the facts, right? The black and the white. And this is not about emotion. This is not Carolyn Rocco's personal opinion. These are the laws. These are words that the CDC and the FDA said. And we're really just trying to have them understand basically where our passion and our desire to do what's right came from. So I was able to acquire a list of all the senior Air Force leaders, but then also knowing that this obviously affects the Army as well. We do have some folks obviously in the Army, but they're all task saturated as well. And so, I've joked and said I've been married to the Air Force for the last 20 years. I don't have young ones or dependent to take care of and to feed. And so for me, I have the time. Like, this is what those 20 years of military service has prepared me for. And so I am willing and wanting to do all the work. I just needed, to get certain names and addresses from my brother in arms over on the Army side. And so, yeah, we took it, and thankfully we had some great donators that bought some books. And so we were able to send them out to individual leaders. So whether or not, like I said, they have received, opened, and read the book, I don't know. I did put my email, my contact information in the memo for any additional questions, or if they want to have a conversation. I am more than willing and ready to do that. So.
Yeah, and Carolyn, and I know you reached out to me and asked if I would provide a memo similar to the one that you had provided that would go to the Air Force officers, that would go with the books that would go to the senior Army officers. I did provide that. I put that in the Substack as well. So, okay, Carolyn, so let me ask you this then. So you said this is the hill that you are willing to die on. Now, of course, we hope that you're speaking metaphorically there, but this is clearly important for you. I mean, you say, hey, if we give a book to somebody, we don't know whether or not they read it, but we at least know that we've done our part. We have provided this book for them. You provided a memo. It's got your name on it. When I provided my memo to these leaders, I was already out of the Army, but you're still in. You are kind of sticking your neck out. So why are you willing to do that?
We don't have to overcomplicate it. It's the right thing to do, right? We all took an oath. I took an officer oath to uphold the Constitution. There are things I know the Army and Navy have them as well. We have the core values in the Air Force. Integrity first is our very first core value. And I actually was given that question, or a similar question in my previous job, where it was, I won't say who, but it was brought to in a conversation, somebody of higher rank than me said, maybe Carolyn, maybe your values and your priorities have just shifted from the Air Force, and maybe this is kind of your time to get out. And I said, you're not doing that. You're not putting that on me. I haven't shifted. You all have shifted. I said, so until, or at least you get rid of the Constitution or the oath, right, to the Constitution, you get rid of our core values, and then you get rid of our Airman's Creed. Until those three things are gone, then I would consider, maybe this isn't really the organization for me. But until that happens, I'm trying to course correct us to get us back to a place where those documents and those words mean something. And 18 and a half years in, when the mandate came down, and so many of my mentors, many of them are retired 06s, a few 07s, said, Carolyn, like, it's a year and a half, like, this is your retirement down the drain. And I said, do you not understand that if they're willing and have absolutely no problem invading our body with a shot, what makes you think that they're not going to invade our bank account and take our retirement 5 or 10 years down the road? Like, I'm able to see the bigger picture and the bigger problem that COVID plays a role in. And for me, I just can't. There's something called a conscience. I can't look at myself in the mirror every morning and every night knowing that I'm doing something that my internal gut is saying, you've got to stand up. And then most importantly, I'm doing this because I do believe in servant leadership. And I've had so many junior airmen enlisted and officer, as well as the cadets, when I was teaching ROTC, say, oh my gosh, like, I wish somebody would have told me all the things that you basically stood up for, or I wish I knew that I could have, submitted a religious accommodation. Nobody told me that. So there's a saying, right? Hey, you need to be the change you want to see. And I'm trying to live the change that I want to see. And like I said, I'm not doing any of this unlawfully. Like, I'm clearly abiding by the laws, maintaining my professionalism, upholding, the tact that's required when you're engaging with senior leaders. I'm not calling anybody names. I will give people an opportunity to explain themselves. But most importantly, I do believe that there are many who just don't know the severity of the situation. And if I can have a role in course correcting, then why wouldn't I take an opportunity to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a fantastic explanation. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain that. And as you're explaining that, though, my blood is kind of boiling here, because when you talk about senior leaders who tell you, hey, maybe your values have shifted. I mean, I feel like I would have come out of the chair if someone had said that to me, because when I look at what we're doing, I think you guys are heroes, don't get me wrong, because of what you're having to stand up against. But 3 years ago, if someone told me that this would happen, I would not have believed it, just because I would never have believed that, 99% of our leaders who are, 05 and above, would have turned their backs on the Constitution. And maybe to some degree, some of them aren't quite as aware of others, but generally speaking, they have turned their backs on the Constitution. And so by merely staying in line with what we believe, as like the military culture, the ethos that we've been a part of forever, I don't even really feel like we're doing some sort of grand thing. Now, it has become a grand thing because we're literally against the entire weight of the Department of Defense. But if you just look at it in terms of just, hey, maintaining your oath to the Constitution and just kind of generally doing what's right, like you said, Carolyn, we don't have to overcomplicate this. Just, hey, kind of do what's right. In that regard, we're not even doing some grand thing. But anyway, thanks for that explanation. But it sickens me to hear these cowardly leaders. Those are my words, not your words, Carolyn. I think the leaders who told you that should just take the uniform off. I think they're a complete disgrace. I think they're an embarrassment to the force. They should resign, in disgrace and walk away. They should. But anyway, so Rob, let me ask you, kind of as we sum up here. You knew you were going to be kind of, or at least you might potentially become a target when you produce, not an email, not a memo, not a harsh tweet, but a book that has, your name at the bottom, right here, your name at the bottom. And you were calling out some senior leaders by name in the book. So you're potentially putting a huge target right here on yourself. What made you willing to do that? And even since the book has come out, you have been very direct in interviews that you've given. Now, you've always been extremely respectful, and you've always been, you've always been backed up by the Constitution and the law, et cetera. I'm with you, but you've been willing potentially to just kind of embrace that big target that you might have put on your own chest. What has made you willing to do that? And then B, you mentioned before that senior leaders are kind of ignoring you. So has anyone come to you and said, Rob, what are you doing?
A few people have kind of raised their eyebrows and been like, hey, what's going on at this point? I think most people who aren't, already read in and, part of our kind of extended, resistance network to defending the Constitution, they would rather not talk to me at all. And not get made part of the next book. But at this point, it's really the two main things. It's my relationship with Jesus Christ and my relationship with my wife. I deserve hell many times over, right? And Jesus sacrificed his life to save me. Why not? Why not do everything I can in this life to try to further the kingdom of God and try to do what I can to stand up for truth, to stand up for justice, and for all those. I mean, I hear the horror stories from those who have been harmed by this mandate, held from their families. People made homeless by this. Folks who now have serious injuries, people who have lost their loved ones because they got myocarditis, young people, dying in droves who otherwise healthy. I have an obligation to stand up and stand for the person of truth, Jesus Christ, and do anything I can, whatever the harm is to me. And then, so the second person is my wife, and I'll share this story because it's a little bit humorous, but we were going to go vote in a deep blue state in the 2020 election. And we knew that the mask was a lie, but it's a mask requirement everywhere. And we teach our kids, live not by lies. Don't buy into this thing. Don't do what everybody else is doing. They want us to not just know it's a lie, but go along with the lie, knowing it's a lie. And so, we cannot participate. We cannot act like that. So we're going to vote, and, my wife and I, and she's the one who's led me into all of this. She's the really courageous one. And I kind of said, hey, I don't, and she never wore a mask, never once. She said, hey, we're going to go in, we're going to vote, no mask, and it's deep blue state. And so I'm like, honey, maybe I'll just mail mine in. And, she turned to me and she said, you coward, right? Just right in my face. And I was like, oh man, she's right. I can't do that. So, I went in there and took the pain and eventually was able to vote. But she's the one who's led me into that. And then every time we've had a tough decision, like the very first, I talk about it in the book. I believe, and I think the law will show, that Admiral Grady, then the commander of Fleet Forces Command, now promoted to the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, committed mutiny in ordering an emergency use authorized vaccine for mandatory reception. And I filed a complaint of mutiny against Admiral Grady for doing that. And three things were required for mutiny, and I can show, and in the book I do show, what those three things were in accordance with the manual for court-martial, and and the actions he took that line up with those three elements of the law that are required to charge somebody with mutiny. And ever since I filed that very first one in November of 2021, I stayed up at night late. I was expecting knocks on the door, 4 a.m. kind of thing. Like if you've heard the story of Mark Houck, the pro-lifer who was arrested by the FDA years after, he had an altercation with a guy who was abusing his son out on the sidewalk in front of an abortion mill that they go and pray at every Wednesday. And some man was, verbally berating and abusing his 12-year-old son out there. And he eventually pushed him away to try to get some distance. Well, they came after him, the FBI, 20 or so agents, cars, guns drawn on him and his 7 children, early in the morning. Like, that was the kind of thing I have been expecting for a long time. And ever since filing that very first mutiny complaint and staying up late at night, kind of worried, knowing I made the decision, worried that something like that was going to happen, it hasn't ever happened to me. And so I've continued to take another step. The bully backs down on the playground. You don't turn and run. You step into the space that the bully had previously occupied. And so that's what I have been trying to do, ever since. And I keep taking steps. The book was just the latest of those steps into the bully space. But the hope is that eventually, we fight with love and we fight with truth, right? So eventually, we hope to win that bully over. We're not trying to defeat an enemy so much as we're trying to win with love these people back over to the truth. And so that's what I would share with everybody, who's learning about the book operation for the first time. And it's not just, the 4 or 5 of us. I've had dozens, maybe as many as 30 or 40 people have reached out and tell me that they've bought extra copies, that they've been giving them away. The book operation is so much bigger than us. We're trying to do it in scale. And we're trying to make sure everybody knows what we're doing. but this thing is so much bigger than us. So, keep doing it, keep sharing it. And not just this book, but if there's something out there that shares the love of your faith, the love of Jesus Christ, and it's important for the world to hear, make sure you're sharing it. Be bold and do something. Stand up for the truth.
Yeah, well said. So, what I would say to those who are listening is, first of all, get your own copy of the book and read it. And then second of all, ensure that other people are reading it. And if you know somebody who's a senior leader in the military, approach them and ask them if they received a copy and, what they thought about it. And my understanding is that some of the copies of this book are also being given to other individuals. For example, certain individuals who work in Congress. So maybe we'll see that kind of start to take off as well. Billy, let me ask you. So when you started giving these copies of the books out, or even previously when you sent out copies of the one Substack post that we talked about, what was the reaction you got? I mean, you told us about how there was some initial resistance because there were individuals who said, "Hey, listen, we can't accept this because of its monetary value." But other than that, more specific to the material in the book, have you heard one way or the other what the reception has been?
No, absolutely nothing. And I wanted to expand on that, on what Carolyn said. She had a key point earlier. We added our contact info to the bottom of those memos. We're not hiding who we are. We have not been shy, like Rob has not been shy. We've been very vocal well alongside Rob with this and supporting him in the book and getting this out. Nobody, not a single individual has contacted us. Not even anybody has contacted my commanding officer and said anything like, "Hey, this lieutenant's out of line. You need to put him in check." I would expect that by now, right? With all the stuff we've been sending out and with the accusatory language, and aggressive language that we put out there, like Rob said, the bullies have backed down. And it's weird that we are saying this and openly calling it all out, and they do nothing. Their tactics now is just turn a blind eye to it and plug their ears and act like they don't see our emails or reading the book or hear our pleas for, correcting or righting the wrongs. So absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Radio silence.
Right. Yeah. A policy of disengagement. They don't want to, they don't want to in any way reify the claims that are in the book by even acknowledging that they're out there, Yeah. Which again, I believe is just completely cowardly. And at this point, these senior leaders, they know what they have done. They know that it's completely unlawful. They know that it's unconstitutional. They also know that it was ultimately destructive to the force, not just physically, but also morally. Moral injury is a real thing. Spiritual injury is a real thing. Both are rampant in our force. So we'll go ahead and we'll start to sum up here. So what I would ask Carolyn, last question for you, and then, of course, share any parting thoughts that you have, Carolyn. But you did mention in your memo specifically, you drew specific attention to the oath. So first of all, what has been any response that you've gotten at all from any of the books that you've sent out? And what made you kind of already touched on this earlier, but what made you specifically draw attention to the oath in the memo that you wrote?
So like Billy, I have not received any response from the recipients of the book, nor of my command, kind of assuming the same thing, that my boss would get an email saying, or a call saying, "Hey, you need to bring her in. She's gone way too far." But none of that has occurred. The oath, that's the one thing that we all have in common, right? And to understand what this COVID mandate did, it went 100% against our constitutional rights. So you either have the oath that actually means something, and the words within, you will support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't think there was that was a mistake to put in domestic. And I'm not saying that everybody who is in the military has, committed some type of illegal activity, domestic illegal activity, but it's a big deal. And I feel like we all can relate to that. So why not, again, instead of trying to convince people to see things my way, Carolyn Rocco's way, this is ensuring that the oath was in there and was the focus. It's not foreign, especially to the senior leaders who have had to take it for, gosh, if they're, 08s or 09s, at least 9 times every time they rank up. So yeah, I think that's what we swear upon, and we need to get back to it. I mean, like I said, coming from an ROTC environment, we have a class solely on the oath. There are many things that we teach: effective followership, right? Listening, all the things that we have not seen actually transpire in the military post our commissioning source, or at least in the last 2 to 3 years. It's important to get back to the basics. Again, I'm really not trying to overcomplicate this. And if the oath doesn't mean anything, then we need to start figuring out that maybe it's not included in us taking, moving into these positions of authority and officership. So I, of course, don't support that, but we've got to know what the words that we're saying, what they mean, and how much weight they have. And I think that's the one thing outside of religious beliefs, because everybody has different, beliefs in that regard. The oath is something that we don't have an exemption. Everybody takes the oath at some point. So.
And I know what you mean, Carolyn, when you say, hey, either the oath has meaning or it doesn't. Now, we all clearly believe that the oath has meaning, but I mean, there seem to be a lot of people in our military, even senior leaders, who don't. So does it or doesn't it, right? Now, Carolyn, of the three of you, Carolyn, you're the only one that I've actually met in person. Billy, I've spoken to quite a bit. Rob, I've spoken to quite a bit. I've been on interviews, I think, with Rob before. But Carolyn, you and I met a couple of weeks ago at Bard's Fest. So that event a couple of weeks ago, and you even had a couple of copies of Rob's book there then. So great. And Carolyn, do you have any other just parting comments before we close?
Nope. I just want to thank you again for hosting this space and being a platform for us to send the message. And we just got to keep talking about it. I had a brief conversation with a friend of mine who said, well, what's the point of doing this? How much more are you guys going to talk about the book and what was done wrong to us, so many years ago? Well, now I can say so many years ago, a year and a half, 2 years ago. And the reason we continue is because if we don't keep bringing it up, it's going to get swept under the rug, and people are going to forget it just like they intend to, right? Which is probably why they haven't responded to our memos thus far. So it's important. And so whoever's hearing this, keep talking about it, get the book, read the book, learn the book, and then share it with your friends and family. And it's a court of public opinion. I think we all agree on that. And then hopefully we'll start getting actual court cases ruling in our favor more often than not. Those 1 or 2 wins that we have, I mean, it's a big deal, but we need to see more of that.
Yeah, I mean, we should be annoying, so if people get annoyed because we keep asking, or we keep talking about it, then it's almost as if we're asking them, well, what part annoys you? Is it the Constitution? Does that annoy you? Are you annoyed by the law? Are you annoyed by people's faith? Are you annoyed by the the true medical information, not the fake medical narrative, but is it the true medical information? Is that what annoys you? So, what part annoys you? Is it, hey, how about military readiness? Does the idea of actually having a functioning military, does that annoy you? So anyway, but thanks for that, Carolyn. Billy, the guy that we might actually refer to as potentially the father of the book operation, was your idea. So thanks for everything that you've done. Any parting comments from you, Billy?
Of course, I always got something to say. So back on to what kind of Rob and Carolyn hit on with the amount of the thousands of horror stories, right, that are still there. And like Carolyn said, we cannot let them forget, because of those horror stories, as well as the people that weren't aware of the statutes, the laws, their rights, their individual freedoms, their oaths, whatever, at whatever junior level below us, they weren't aware of it. Plus, you also have a large number that were aware and know that it's not right. And those people have been too scared to speak up. And I've told countless senior leaders this, that what I'm telling you is the voice of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of service members. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. And I'm like, and I always end with, is that the kind of military you want, where you have service members that are too afraid to speak up? I mean, every other program out there, they tell us to speak up, see something, say something, right? If you see something, if you get that gut feeling, say something. They know this. We can use all the buzzwords with them. And they say, well, of course I want them to speak up. And I said, well, that's exactly what's wrong. And that's what we need to move on to. We need to acknowledge this and move on to a healing phase that matches or exceeds, you know, the level of propaganda and push that we just went through the COVID era. It has to happen if we want to restore trust. And I write that all the time in almost everything I send out, and I tell them face to face. And another thing that we keep, I've seen a lot of our groups, and we've all been doing this the last couple of years, we say the leadership, right? The upper leadership needs to acknowledge this. I've come to the conclusion, especially the last couple of months, that they're not going to until the agencies that are supposed to hold them accountable and hold them accountable they're not going to do it. And I mean agencies like the DHA, BUMED, the Naval Safety Center, right? From my experience, and the IGs, all the IGs, every one of them. We engage with them, and they all cover for them as well, right? We've all called them out. We've all engaged with all of these entities, and they completely ignore all of it. So until they decide to start doing their job and upholding their oaths within their job alone, nothing's going to change. We know this. The upper leaders, I don't think at this point are going to, until we start getting the IGs and individual and the subsequent commands to start doing their jobs as well. That includes all the JAGs as well, and the medical advisors at all these hospitals and the safety centers and so on and so forth. They have to start doing their jobs and stop sweeping this under the rug.
Yeah, very well said. I agree with you about, we have to move into a recovery phase, and we have to heal from this. And as long as it's being swept under the rug, that's never going to happen. So, Rob, again, thanks for your book. Thanks for all that you've done. True leader in the movement. Any parting words from you, Rob?
Yeah, just one connection I want to make. You said artifact, and I love it because you need to go back to the founding fathers to see a battle similar to the one we're fighting right now. What you're seeing on the grand scale is a national government, a federal government pitched against the individual. It's the individual against the government. And that's what we're seeing right here. And it's runaway federal government in control of this fight right now. We've seen that before. The last time that happened, in the 1760s and 1770s, before we ended up winning the thing in the 1780s. So I tie in to every chapter a quote from the founding fathers. I talk about things that they went through. Well, this artifact, as you call it, and I thank you for calling that, this artifact is meant to make connections to that original fight for individual liberty. And that's what we're doing again. The roles have reversed a little bit. Now it's the very small ragtag band of people trying to uphold a way of life, traditions, values, and the Constitution that was passed down to us against a runaway federal power. And you've got to pick which side you're on, and one side is going to be easier. So pick the hard thing. Typically the harder thing to do is the right thing to do. So that's what I would leave folks with. Go back to the founding fathers, learn what they went through, and be prepared to do something bold, defend your rights.
Yeah, very well stated. So again, I agree so much with your focus on the founding of the nation. I'm a big historian. I'm a fan of the founding fathers. So I appreciate that connection. It's also important if we're gonna talk about our oath to the Constitution. And again, I thank you so much for writing the book. Thanks for being here with us tonight, Rob, Carolyn, Billy. And again, for those listening, the book by Rob Green is called Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines. The subtitle is A Story of Hope for Those Who Love Liberty. In the description, we will have links to where you can find the book. So if you are unfamiliar with the book, get a copy of the book and read it. So who should read this book? Is this book only for military? Here's who should read the book. You should read the book if you are in the military. You should read the book if you are married to someone in the military, if you are related to someone who is in the military, if you were ever in the military, if you've thought about being in the military, if you've ever seen a military movie, you should read the book. It's for everybody. If you care at all about what is happening in the military, and you should as an American citizen, because it's such an important institution for just our liberties and kind of our culture as a nation. Right or wrong, it is very heavily tied to our military. Then you should get a copy of the book and then give copies of the book out to other people. So this has been just a short discussion with these heroic figures that I've had here today, Rob, Billy, and Carolyn, about the book operation, focused on Rob's book, but also on distributing that book to senior leaders in the military so they cannot continue to hide from the actions that they've done. As Rob has said many times over, we're not going to shut up. We're going to continue to beat this drum because it's important. And if we annoy people, then again, which part is it that annoys you? The Constitution, the law, a functioning military, freedom. I mean, which one of those don't you like? This book is an artifact. You got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. You can either accept its claims or you can refute them. You're gonna have to produce some evidence to do that. But what you can't do is just ignore it. So if you're a senior leader in the military, then you're probably a coward, because you're not speaking out. My words, not the words of these individuals, but we're just not impressed with your actions. We're not impressed with your cowardice. We're not impressed with your lack of faith when it comes to your fealty to the oath or to the institution, or to readiness in general. So again, I want to thank the three of you that have given me a little bit of time tonight. I really appreciate it. And thanks for everything that you've done and everything that you will continue to do. God bless.